Hello, curious humans, and welcome to the Cosmic Tusk podcast. I'm your host, George Howard, aka the Cosmic Tusk. We're the sponsors of the Cosmic Summit, as you know. Planning is underway, and we hope to announce a date possibly as early as later this month, it being January. So happy New Year, by the way. Also, it's the first recording we've done since the new year. It's going to be a killer year. We are kicking it off with a wonderful guest today. Mr. Lance Weaver, a working geologist in Utah, who, among other things, sponsors an excellent site on just kind of standard geology of Utah, but I couldn't imagine a better resource for a state. I wish we had something like this in North Carolina, Lance, but he is our kind of guy at the Cosmic Tusk and the Cosmic Summit and our constellation of subjects. He brings several of them together. We actually share something in common. That's how I came across him. We've both been on Demystify Psi, a fantastic podcast, twice, Lance.
Nice.
Which is quite an honor, man. Those
That's
guys,
right.
Yeah. Michael and Anastasia. I recommend that podcast to anyone.
Love those
they're
guys.
incredibly intelligent people. They ask fantastic questions, and I don't know, they're a great resource. And I know their listener base is very high quality. There's some good people listening into them. We're lucky to have been on there. But Lance, as far as, you touch a lot of subjects like we do, from, catastrophic geology, lost periods in history, polar excursions, mysterious ancient texts. And I find your work in pre-Columbian cultural diffusion to be excellent, and look forward to hearing a lot of that today. It's not just the handbags with you. And then we all know it's not just the handbags, but that's kind of the gateway
basis.
drug, to this subject. But you take it further, and you do it very, very well, sir. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lance, and how you got into this, and a little your own journey, and then let's jump right into pre-Columbian contacts amongst civilizations we once thought were separate.
All right. Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, George.
Yes, sir.
It's nice to get to know you.
Yes, sir. It is. Nice
anyway, I love talking geology, so this will be a great experience. And I love being in places where I don't just have to have my professional hat on, right? I've been a geologist for 25 years or so. I grew up in southern Utah, and so I weekly, I'm really into the outdoors, canyoneering, slot canyons. I live about a half an hour away from Zion National Park, a couple hours from the Grand Canyon. So I go to the Grand Canyon and Zion and Bryce like often, right?
Yeah. Geology heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. And growing up in those areas, it was hard to not, visit those areas over and over. And I spent my childhood just like playing on some of these formations that everyone talks about and that are so important in determining like ideas about the age of the earth and paleogeography and how the earth has progressed through time. So like spending so much time on those growing up, it was hard not to like have a geology mindset. I mean, pretty much everybody who's really into the outdoors and the outdoor community down in southern Utah has at least like big questions in their mind. So I can still remember the first time like I took my first Geology 101 course and kind of asked the professor some questions. I remember I asked one professor and it didn't make any sense the answer he gave to me. Like why were there these patterns on this geologic map, and whether this was a fault or what. And I remember I went to a second professor and asked him, like I brought him this geologic map that I'd seen. If people don't know what geologic maps are, I'll maybe show it a little later in the presentation. Good. But he took the map and he like folded it so that it mimicked like what the actual strata was doing, so that it showed me the way that this fold, it's an anticline, was actually kind of coming up out of the earth, and it like blew my mind. It was like this aha moment where it's like I can see in 3D. Like I loved maps. I loved the topography and just like seeing all the scenes, but this suddenly made it so it's like, whoa, I can see in 3D and I can see through time. Like that one I did just like opened this whole new window to being able to see like a fourth and fifth dimension of the vistas, that I was used to. Yeah. So I was sold from there. From there, I was like, I'm going to be a geologist. And since then, it was kind of helpful because from my early days, I grew up fairly religious and had a pretty strong like catastrophic, but more like even creationism, young earth creationism. And so I had these two like forces towing on me, and you had like the traditional models and these creationist models. And I remember I'd watch these debates and be like, well, is there something to that? Like, so I went through school like questioning everything. I didn't believe a single thing either side told me. It was like I just questioned everything. And I've kept that kind of inquisitiveness. And I've since had to kind of give up creationism, young earth geology, because it just doesn't fit the data.
Right.
But I love the fact I still like that there are two like, and I think there should always be two like bipolar camps. I wish the academia did a better job of this in keeping away from the monopolar view and having
Hmm.
like two, almost like the two-party system in politics, having two views that are antithetical to each other, totally, opposite
Yeah.
against each other. But when you do that, you keep dogma from really taking over a science. Like there is a lot of dogma in academia, and I've seen that in my professional career and in my schooling. And so it's like I love having like two groups that totally kind of like pick apart the other group, because then you end up finding the problems that each group kind of sweeps under the
Yeah.
rug.
Red team, blue team.
Exactly.
Responsible adversarialism. Intellectual adversarialism. What's kind of happened though is there's red team, blue team now, but it's not within academia. It's between the internet and academia.
Yeah.
So the information's getting out there. It just didn't settle into an educational or academic context.
Yeah.
But where do you want to start with some of the subjects that you have become so well versed in? I mean, there's a lot there. Where do you want to take
Um,
it?
yeah, maybe I'll start with my big picture, and then
Yeah,
we'll zoom in and kind of just run with the ancient empires. This transoceanic pre-Columbian contact.
that's our kind of stuff, buddy.
And there's so much evidence for it. There's
Yeah,
just so
yeah,
much
yeah,
evidence for it. And it's kind of like, so even with geology, it's the same thing. Like I've found a lot of different things that are dismissed by mainstream geology. And just like the archaeology has been dismissed by mainstream archaeology. But I have a lot of faith in academia that I think that they will come around, but they're
yeah,
part of a boat that turns very slowly, and
yeah,
that's good. And I think that the advent of the internet, and this is why I really love coming on podcasts, and I kind of hope to start my own YouTube stuff soon, is I
yeah.
think that these YouTube personalities have a, like, they can play a part in turning academia's head faster,
Oh,
right?
you're absolutely, and particularly of the generation that's coming along. I mean,
Yeah.
Randall Carlson, who's a friend of the Cosmic Summit, says all the time he hears from young geologists that says, "Hey, I'm with you, Brody. I'm just, keeping my head down until the older fellows move along."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm doing some of that myself too. I mean,
yeah,
I used to always tell a story, like if you've read kind of behind Walter Alvarez and the whole idea of the KT extinction
yeah,
being popularized. I mean, it used to be that even he was totally poo-pooed. Everyone thought there's no way that an asteroid impact caused this huge extinction. They totally dismissed it because there was so many species that had died off well before that. But it was like it
yeah.
was his popularization, his dad being a Nobel laureate, having
That's
money,
right.
him being able to have influence to get into those circles and to get himself onto TV specials to really
Yeah,
popularize it in the media. Like that completely within like a 10-year period just like turned academia, turned their boat, turned their whole head and their idea of what was right.
right.
And I think that now YouTube is making it so it doesn't take somebody who's rich or a Nobel laureate's son to do
Yeah,
that. Anyone who has great ideas can popularize them really quickly and at least kind of get the ball rolling, even if, like for instance, I think Graham Hancock, I love him. He's got a lot of good stuff, and he's kind of
yeah.
turned academia's head. But at the same time, there's a lot of things where I think that's like, oh, you've gone too far there. I don't think I'm ever going to accept that aspect because I just don't think it's academic enough,
Hmm.
right? And so it's not. There is a danger that YouTube will make it so that more people believe in theories that simply aren't true.
Hmm.
Creationism being a good example, right?
Hmm.
Then maybe you get a ton of people like believing in this thing, but then that just means the academia needs to step it up and present their side of the story. And we can have this great debate online so that the
Right.
truth comes out,
Yeah,
right?
and I believe there's a natural winnowing process, even though there's going to be a lot of false information and people that aren't very discerning and how they pick through revolutionary ideas. But at the end of the day, I think the truth is bubbling up, and that YouTube, which just seems the silliest, most mundane thing, after you start engaging with science in it, you say, "Oh my God, it's just an invaluable resource." Well,
Yeah.
along with all the other traditional resources, we shouldn't, throw away the books and the texts and whatnot. But there's a hell of a process underway, and then you're a part of it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I look forward. You should jump into YouTube. You do well on camera and interviews and whatnot, and you should start doing your own show, although it's tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I have plans, and so many of my theories, like I've kind of like kept back because I want to wait until I do my own channel. But let me jump
Jump
in
in.
to the real starting point of this, right? So probably the earliest thing that I found that was kind of like a catastrophist idea that,
Yeah.
that the first time I saw it, I could never get it out of my mind. And the more I studied it, the more I'm like, this is right. Like this is true. And the prevailing model is absolutely untrue. And that is the location of the polar ice caps during the LGM, right? During the last glacial maximum. So this is an article on my website, Utah Geology, right? And I've got just tons of resources on utahgeology.com if people want to go there. I've been working on it for 25 plus years. I incorporate a lot of my ideas from that into my professional life. So I mean, the resources that I've created are world class, right? Like, and I'll show some of them later. My geologic visualization maps and stuff. I was kind of a pioneer in this field. But the first time I saw this concept that northern Alaska and northern Siberia were never glaciated during the last glacial maximum or any of the previous major glaciations, at least with the continental glacier. They might have had some ice on there, but they were not scoured by a continental glacier. And this is not anything anyone debates. Like everyone kind of knows where the ice caps were. Any good glaciologist or any geologist.
What two regions? Obviously not the
So
northern, the Western Hemisphere, not Canada, etc.
Right. So you've got the Laurentian ice sheet, right? And the Scandian ice sheet and the Kara ice sheet. So this is where the ice sheets were. And you know where they were because they scoured the bedrock. They scoured everything all the way down to bedrock.
Yeah.
But you have places like the northern Yukon here, right? And Siberia. These places did not have continental ice sheets on them. And they are within the current Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Right. So the more you think about it, at first, you kind of like read this and you can read my article. I kind of talk about the prevailing views and why they think what they think, and I have animations here that show kind of how the ice sheet grew and shrunk and how it really is, centered over Greenland. And the prevailing views on why there weren't, continental ice sheets in those regions is because they think it was too cold. Right. And so their ideas is like, well, Siberia, that whole area, it was so cold that you couldn't get moisture into those regions. And that theory kind of seems logical at first glance because a lot of those regions really do have very low snow totals, even presently compared to like the coastal regions, but they still do get snow, right? But the thing that you got to realize is like the center of Antarctica is the exact same way. I mean, the reason why we have some of those central Antarctican, Dome Sea, Epica, Volstock, those like ice core data points that we get, they're there because they have almost zero snow every year. They might get like 10 centimeters, And so there's places within Antarctica that are just the same. They get very, very little snowfall every year, and yet there's still 10,000 feet of ice there. Yeah. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much it snows. It matters how much it melts. Yeah. Right? It matters how much it accumulates. And so the idea that is passed around that it's like, well, these places were just too cold. I mean, look right now at the current snowfall. You go down here and I have
centimeters goes a long way.
Yeah. I mean, there's areas in Antarctica that have, less than Siberia did most likely. But you look right now at how the ice falls in Siberia, especially when we're talking about these regions right here of Siberia, that really do and probably would during the last glacial maximum get significant inflows from the Pacific currents. Yeah. The idea that those, are in the Arctic Circle right now and just didn't glaciate. Yeah. Once again, they're bad. I bought them for small periods of time early on, but the more you look at the lopsidedness, the more you're like, no, something else is going on here. Like it just looks like the North Pole was over Greenland.
And you're speaking, just to be clear, of the geological polar North Pole, not the magnetic North Pole.
Yeah, I'm talking about the spin axis, right? Yeah. Because we all know the magnetic pole migrates, like crazy. It's the magnetic pole is going all over the place.
With that and whatnot, and it could be very challenging understandings about that. But the actual Earth being oriented differently is a far different thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the magnetic pole, I mean, actually fits into my model, right? Because my entire model is like, okay, trying to solve this problem. Like first of all, is it possible that the North Pole was in central Greenland during the ice ages, right? So that's a big ask. First of all, no geologist, that's not mainstream. Like that's a fringe theory. No geologist believes that because in current models, even though we know that there's true polar wander and that the North Pole migrates over time, that spin axis migrates over time, we think it happens, like small amounts every millions of years, right? So, I mean, I've got on here some diagrams. Let's see, let me find, so you can just see what like a geologist.
Beautiful website.
So here's a great, you know, there's a peer-reviewed mainstream geologic article and illustration on the migration of the pole, true polar wander, right? So these are millions of years, like 145 million years ago, you know, and everywhere gives different locations because you got the plates moving. And so these are from the Emperor Hawaii Sea Mountain chain. So because depending on where you sample your things from, it's going to put that North Pole in a different location. But they think the spin axis, right, from the Pacific frame of reference actually came up here during these periods, during these millions of years. So it's moving tiny bits, right, every millions of years. Right. And so we know that it happened.
Mainstream view of the spin axis?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But so the spin axis mainstream will tell you, given millions of years, that it existed this far south relative.
Yes. It moves very slowly.
Okay. Learning something from Lance already. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's multiple reasons on that. But as you kind of distribute mass slightly different over millions of years, whether it be through plate motion or whether it be through celestial motions, you're going to have a slight pull, right, of the crust. And so a lot of the illustration they'll use when they're talking about TPW pretty often is like they'll put a bug on the pole, and you'll just act like the bug is kind of walking up the pole because you have this second center of mass, the second moment of inertia that's slowly tugging on the entire Earth. And so the Earth keeps spinning in the same direction while the Earth slides, right? Hopefully that kind of makes sense. In fact, let me grab my globe here. I mean, I have so many globes in here, but it's like the Earth is totally just slow. You can pretend here's the spin axis and it's just slowly migrating, but continuing to spin and pointing off in the exact same direction.
Gotcha.
Right. So there's nothing controversial about true polar wander, but it's highly controversial to say that it moved, you know, some 700 miles since, you know, 24 to 14,000 years ago. Like that is, that's bonkers. Like no one believes that. But I'm here to say, like, I am amassing more and more information, more and more evidence that this really does happen. And the mechanism is actually like a lot more simple than you might think, right? It's built into the very Milankovitch cycles themselves. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I want to kind of whet people's appetite to just kind of think about the concepts that it's like, okay, we know that every 24,000 years we have the Milankovitch cycles working on the Earth, right? Yeah. So climate change is just completely determined by Milankovitch cycles. You know, for the most part, they are the primary driver. Okay. And so, and there's these three aspects of it, you know, right? You got the eccentricity and the tilt of the Earth and the precession that are all kind of working in separate cycles to bring about changes in the temperature, like enough to make ice masses go all the way down from Greenland to New York, so that there's 10,000 feet of ice in New York. You know what I mean? So I kind of posit this idea. If you think that gravitate or that the energy forces just by changes in obliquity and eccentricity are enough to actually affect weather that much, what if you put your mind and just kind of puzzle with the ideas of what gravity is doing to the outer core, right? What kind of influences is gravity having to the Earth's liquid outer core? And over long periods of time, could it somehow alter the rates that we believe exist in true polar wander right now? And we'll come back to that. But the more that I puzzle over that, the more I'm like, oh, you know what? This isn't so crazy after all. It just hasn't been looked at carefully enough. And maybe you'll believe it, maybe you don't. But I would invite everyone as I first talk about these like lost civilizations and how things kind of collapse and reestablish, collapse and reestablish. I want you to just kind of think in your mind, is it possible that we've got this happening on a bigger, like where we really have complete social and societal civilization-wide collapse because we have massive changes happening in the spin axis of the Earth. Right.
And they'd be periodic?
Yeah.
Would they be cyclical, not just periodic?
Absolutely. Okay. They would follow the Milankovitch cycles.
Okay.
Right.
With a halfway point too. I believe. You believe
exactly.
It's 24 and 12.
Exactly. Yep. You want to, whether you want to call it, you know, a 24 full cycle or 26 instead of half, but it's in there. So as you go back and forth.
It struck me that the Younger Dryas is exactly one great year.
Yeah.
Back. I mean, what are the odds of that? It's actually also kind of spooky.
And I should say, like, something that's continued to interest me in this idea, right, is like I've got my scientific hat and I'm looking at these things from a purely scientific viewpoint, but I've always been really interested in like certain specific channeled material, like religious literature, right? And so, I mean, obviously we've got the Bible that is pervasive. So everyone understands that the Bible like advances catastrophism, right? Whether or not you think that this flood, was by Noah and his 8 people at exactly 24,000 BC, or whether you think that this is actually more like a symbolic mythical illustration to just try and hit home the idea that the earth has gone through catastrophes, right? That they're bringing forth this mythical story. And it's interesting even that it's like there's exactly 10 patriarchs before the flood between Adam and Noah, and there's exactly 10 patriarchs after the flood from Noah to Abraham, and they spell something in Hebrew. So it's almost like they're trying to tell a story, almost like the Egyptians would, in a very symbolic, prototypal type of way, archetypal type of way, which is kind of the way I look at it now, right? So I've given up my biblical literalism and my biblical young earth because it just doesn't fit the data. But what I do believe is the Bible is carrying over like some very important lessons. Yeah. And there's some really cool fundamental books that I've read that give ideas on how that might be happening, the way they might be doing it. And one is called OASPE, right? And so if anyone's ever heard of OASPE, OAHSPE, it's kind of like one of the most fundamental like pioneer channel texts in existence. So it came about like in 18, I think it was written in 1870s, just after the Civil War, right? And so this is like before so many scientific and astronomical principles that we rely on today have really been invented. And yet it advances like this cosmology that's incredibly insightful, where it talks about like the precessional cycle. And it talks about how it has like 3 precessional cycles, each 24,000 years, and that they're broken up into these periods of 3,000 years. So you've got 3, 6, 9, 12, and then 3, 6, 9, 12 again, So then you've got 4 cycles of 4 for every 12 and 24,000 years. And then it says that every one of them is kind of named after like a head of the dispensation, like a biblical person might say that like Adam was the head of a dispensation and Noah. So they use this system, and then they say, well, that's what the Bible's trying to tell. Like the Bible is trying to tell you that every one of these people wasn't just themselves. Like they weren't just this guy that lived 1,000 years before the flood. It's actually symbolism of large periods of time that existed before, long ago, way long before 6,000 years ago.
Right.
So it's So it's an interesting idea, right? At very least, it's a very interesting idea, and probably I think one of the most fascinating parts of the book is this guy, right? He channeled this book in like, I can't remember, like super short amount of time, right? It's like 1,000 pages and he writes it in a couple months, maybe a month or 2. And he draws all these illustrations in it that are just mind-blowingly crazy. Like I wish
come across this. I can't wait to look it up, man.
I wonder if I have some examples of it. I have my Utah Geology website, and then I have my gathered in one site here that is kind of like a lot of my more spiritualist musings.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this has a ton of stuff, But like we'll talk about the Kolbrin in a second, because the Kolbrin is another one. Like, man, it's such fascinating ideas in the Kolbrin. The Law of One is another one, really fascinating ideas. But this idea of OASPE, do I have? Oh, I don't. Dang it. It just has some really interesting ideas on anyway, on the timeline, on human timeline, on drawings, on cosmology, on exactly how the Earth moves through the galaxy, how it does this circuit around the entire galaxy and does this thing called the Great Serpent, and how the ancients were totally knowledgeable about this, and the ideas of Atlantis. And I mean, it probably really is like the foundational text of all of those crazy ideas that float around. And it comes from some guy who said it, an angel taught it to him, right?
I'll be damned. Yeah, so I used to dismiss channeling, but now I've become a believer in remote viewing, and that leads you to, I'm not nearly as dismissive. I'm always open-minded about stuff, but if he channeled 1,000-page, or if he wrote a 1,000-page book in a month, something inspired him.
I say take it all with a big grain of salt, and make sure you separate in your mind your science from your religion. But some of the ideas that are in these texts, they almost feel to me like they have pioneered science, right? Like there's concepts in there that are so, like, I swear that whoever wrote Star Trek read this book and just modeled it after huge sections, because it has all these multiple dimensions and people teleporting through the dimensions, and just like so many Star Trek ideas that it makes me, like, every time I see one of these really crazy sci-fi movies, I'm like, they're getting these ideas from either from this text or one like it, or else from the people who gave this text? Who knows how
Right.
that
Like
works?
almost a literary deja vu. Like
Yeah,
I've seen this before in other contexts. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, let's dive into the archaeology, and then
Okay.
we'll kind of circle around back to the geology. 'Cause, God, there's just so many cool,
You
interesting
must be a
concepts
follower
here.
of Mario build reps.
So, I'd never heard of Mario until I did that Demystify
Yeah.
Science interview. And then people had been pointing him out. And I think they even mentioned him to me. And so I reached out and I kind of talked to him. And I remember when he first kind of showed me his map, I scanned through it quickly because most of his stuff is behind a paywall. So you can't really get to
Mhm.
it. And I looked at a bunch of his sites and his idea that these sites are pointing to ancient North Poles. And I thought, because first of all, the Great Pyramid, which is like probably one of the oldest things we have, is like pointing pretty much just north.
Yeah. Yeah. I wondered about that same
So
thing. Yeah.
that was like the first thing that made me think like, oh, I don't know if it's happened in recent time enough. I believe it happened since the last glacial maximum, but I don't think that there's been true polar wander since the pyramid was built, you
Right.
know? And then I looked at a couple of his other ones, like in Mesoamerica. Like I really know my stuff with Mesoamerican archaeology, and he was pointing at things that were like really late, like sites like Tula, and there's a number of sites that it's like I know these sites are way late, way too late,
Yeah.
and they don't really have pyramids that per se I would think that are built on older things. So I totally dismissed everything he read, but then I ran into Mark Carlotto's stuff. Have you seen him?
I've seen the name.
So Mark
Yeah.
Carlotto is similar things, but he's got his data open, right? And he is more scientifically minded, and you don't see him like throwing out so much like these ideas that this is 99.9% statistically a certainty that this, he's just more scientifically minded. So I resonated with him, and the more I looked into that, the more it opened my mind back to Mario's stuff. I was kind of like,
Mhm.
I don't think that I think a lot of these that he's giving are wrong, because when I doubt check him, I don't agree with him, but a lot of them could be, like they could
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
and so then you have to solve the issue that's like, well, why is the pyramid facing north? If we've got other sites like Baalbek or even, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, it's like we know that was built on an ancient ruins, right? On an older society. I think that there's a really good chance that a lot of those archaeological sites actually were built on older ruins, right?
Yeah.
And that they just haven't found,
Clearly, Baalbek was.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a great example, right? Because it's like you've got this Roman thing, and also all the radiocarbon dates are Roman age. But has anyone really looked underneath the massive stones? Because the chance that those massive stones are Roman and not at the very youngest the Temple of Solomon times, right?
Yeah.
Because they match that, or far older than both, Solomon and Baalbek, which have very similar stones, are part of a much older civilization. Like that's really believable. Like if you
Yeah.
look into it, it really is believable. And I'm trying to
The
create
Romans
some.
have bragged about those more, or they would have done it somewhere else. It's just an odd place to have put by far their largest megaliths.
Yeah,
I mean, why do that in Lebanon?
yeah. In
Not
fact,
Rome.
so I have. I'll just show one thing here really quick. Oh
Please
wait,
do.
wrong. So check out if you go to my Utah Geology site, and I've got at the bottom of it kind of two maps. I have my North American Archaeology Explorer, and then I have my Ice Age viewer here.
Yep.
And if you go, in fact, the Archaeology Explorer right here, I've got like so many archaeological sites in my database. Like I built this application, right? Just so that I could really explore all the different archaeological sites in the world and find out, like what their date is. And I've kind of scanned through quite a few of these, but this is something if someone wanted to really get on this, they could go through and just do a much better job than even I've done at
You
exploring
laid
these
some
sites.
groundwork for them.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it easy here. Like here's where you can find the archaeological sites. And then if you go to my Ice Age Explorer, right? So here I've plotted the last glacial maximum ice extents on a map. So you can see right here, like this is where the ice cap was. And I haven't finished putting these all on the timeline, but I'm trying to show where the pole could have moved if my theory of rapid true polar wander, is true. Like I'm trying to map out exactly how this would take place. And then these are all sites from Mark Carlotto, and each color represents kind of like a different pole. And this is kind of what Mario's kind of done, but has behind a paywall. But I'm trying to make this open so that people can explore this and actually see sites to see if we really can like map out a believable system where we could use the North Pole as a dating method, right? We could use the location of the North Pole. And in this is kind of like the question you have to ask yourself, well, it's like, so if the pole is moving, how does it do it? Does it do it like in these big arcuate patterns? Does it do it in a zigzag pattern, like you see with True Polar Wander in the geologic record? Does it do it in big circles? Does it do it slowly, or does it happen with big jerks and then kind of slowly, and big jerks and then slowly, like a punctuated equilibrium? Like there's lots of scientific questions that people need to ask, and I think I've kind of like solved it, but I'm going to leave that open. And if there's people out there who are interested in it, especially if there's someone who has like some degrees and wants to co-author some articles, because I'm really starting to write a bunch of articles that I want to try and get published, as well as my book.
Fantastic. And
shoot
I was
me-
about to say you have a book coming too.
Yeah, shoot me a line. It's pretty involved. I've got a lot of stuff in here. But okay, what's good? We're going to jump back in to the evidence for this pre-Columbian transoceanic cultural diffusion, and we're going to expect that people have at least heard about some of these things. So I won't go into as much detail as maybe I could. But right, so the handbags, like we were talking about before the show, these are pretty popular. Most people have seen these. You know, here where you've got on the
Gateway
left,
drug to cultural diffusion.
and you know, and it's the best gateway drug because it's so hard to dismiss, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things where I dismissed these early on in my career, younger through my university years, you know, or even earlier when I was studying this stuff. And it's like when you see it and you really look into it, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I need to stop dismissing this. These are too strong. Like there's no way that in La Venta you could have like this serpent, you know, holding, and this guy in his, you can see that he's got an eagle warrior helmet, which is a later Toltec and Teotihuacano, you know, terracotta, where they've got the exact same thing that you see over here, you know, with the Horus figurines in Nimrod, you know, and they're so similar from the fact that they're holding the handbag to the anthropomorphic eagle warrior stance to the snake that he's in right there, right? Because very next, if you go to Egypt, and this is one, you see that last one pretty often. A lot of people found that one, but I've never seen anyone do most of these, including this one, where they see that Happy's cave here, which is this glyph, a very a popular motif in Egyptian mythology, like this idea that Happy lived within this cave, and the cave is a serpent with an avian head, right? It's the exact same thing.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah. The avian head with the serpent, and not only that, the quadriform shape, you know, that starts in Olmec times in Mesoamerica and then works its way later into the pre-classic. So it's like these are all old world motifs that the idea that they just kind of like mystically and magically appeared in the New World in 700, in some cases 1200 BC, that these guys were just like thinking the same. And the only way you can do that is if, once again, you're like believing that these people are having spiritual experiences and getting taught by the gods or by spirits or something, that because there's no way you would just magically come up with these ideas.
Or there's some kind of archetypal thing in the human brain that leads you there. And I find that to be a little bit of a stretch too, because we're not making those same motifs today.
Yeah, I just think it makes more sense.
We're not driven to, you know, do a snake with a Birdman inside it. You know, that's not natural human cognition, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes
a lot more sense that they're bringing boats over.
Yeah,
you know,
man.
And there's tons of
insult to say that people get blown across oceans to this day. I mean, it's just ridiculous that you think that the people weren't capable of crossing at least the Atlantic Ocean.
For real. In fact, have you heard the story of after the Fukushima earthquake in Japan, there was like this massive cement box that just floated all the way across and ended up in California. Yeah. And it's it barely floats. It's a cement box and it just like drifted across, you know?
Yeah. Do you think thousands of years, you know, persisted particularly with the boats that the Egyptians had? I mean, those were some large vessels.
Yeah. And that's a big one that I think that's like, so when you look at what I'm kind of putting here as my timeline of the different areas where I am quite sure that they had shipping channels that were global, you think that someone's going to build the Great Pyramid. Like the Great Pyramid is not like this small thing. Like the engineering technology involved in that is unbelievable. So you think they could build the Great Pyramid, but they couldn't sail across the ocean.
That's right.
It really is. It's a hard sell. The prevailing model is the hard sell. It's
Right.
not what I'm saying. It's not this like pre-Columbian stuff. It is the prevailing model that is like, oh yeah, so they were building the Great Pyramid, but they weren't going across the ocean because their ships
Hmm.
weren't good enough. It's like
Hmm.
these guys were advanced, right? And I found I won't even go there. Like I said, that Owaspy book has some pretty interesting ideas with the guy who built the Great Pyramid. Now there's like records, and he put them in 3 different areas of the world, and he was like finding out all the ideas behind astronomy with the precession of the equinox and mapping them out to
Yeah.
like the smallest degree. Um,
Huh.
anyway, which I found evidence for. It's another one of those things where it's like it's this crazy idea I read in a book that's like, it sounds crazy, but then I was like, whoa, well, why do we have Egyptian motifs in these 3 nodes? That if you were a scientist and you wanted to create like a mapping and actually find out when the nodes for the solstices were
Yeah.
and the lunar eclipses, you would want to put in a station that watched the sun and moon from these 3 locations on the earth, this like triangle along the earth. And it's like, well, there we have a bunch of Egyptian motifs in those areas. Okay, anyway, so I digress.
No, good. Keep moving, man.
So let's go here. We've got more of this avian stuff. In fact, even you see this guy with the fish feet, right?
Yeah.
Same as the fish feet there.
Yeah.
These are all very particular motifs. You can see the bird feet that he's got going here,
Yeah.
right? Is the same thing that, and we'll see that in a second. We've got the Laventa mask. So this is the same location that Laventa stela is found. We've got all these incredibly Asiatic looking masks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they absolutely look Asiatic. And so once again, and they're anomalous, right? You read the thing here where the scientists, the archaeologists who found this stuff in Laventa are like, that's kind of crazy because you don't really find this kind of stuff outside of Laventa. It's just in Laventa.
Oh,
But
interesting. Yeah.
so it seems to me that like Laventa, which is right there in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, is like basically a Panama Canal for these ancient cultures. They are shipping
And
things across the isthmus so they can go all the way around the world, right? I mean, that's what makes sense. So
oh,
it's,
I saw you speculating on kind of a Panama Canal connection when no canal, but just 100-mile traverse. But La
exactly.
Venta is actually at that narrow point,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it has motifs, however we want to call it, artifacts that are kind of
Both from
anomalous.
China. Exactly. And they're both from China and they're from Egypt and
Uh-huh.
the Near East.
Yeah, China's still trying to take over the Panama Canal. Nothing's changed. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. And the Chinese have been unbelievable mariners for thousands and thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
You just look up the Wikipedia article on the Maritime Silk Road.
Yeah.
It's called the Bronze Age Maritime Silk Road.
Yeah.
Like in the Bronze Age, China was shipping a ton of stuff all the way from the Near East, definitely from India. I mean, regular trade to
Yeah.
India.
If you can make it to India and across the Indian Ocean, you could go the other
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Why not just head across to La Venta, right? To the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and then now you can trade with the Near East and the Egyptians.
Is La Venta on the western coast of Panama?
Is on the eastern coast. Yeah.
It
So not
is.
Panama. Let me show you right here. So if you
Yeah.
see my cursor right there, it's actually on the north coast of Tehuantepec. So
Gotcha.
and if you remember when they built the Panama Canal, like that was not easy because it's swamps, right? That's a horrible
Yeah.
place to cross. No one wants to go across there because you're all dying of malaria. And so
Yeah.
Tehuantepec is actually a much better place. If you're going to try in the ancient world to pick a place where you could use porters to kind of port your stuff across, you wouldn't pick Panama. You'd pick
Yeah.
something more like Tehuantepec where the jungles aren't so ugly, especially if the
I
climate
think
was different back then.
yeah, so I was definitely wrong about where you were, but haven't they even proposed a canal there, or at least a railroad or something like
Yep.
that?
Yep.
Another crossing up there.
Yeah. Yep. Right now, they've
Huh.
just built like this huge railroad and big ports on
Yeah.
both sides. They have proposed even canals through there and through Nicaragua.
Uh-huh.
It's not a stretch. We're still doing it today,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, just look up these articles on the Bronze Age and how much shipping there was through China. And once again, these ideas that seem crazy are not crazy anymore, right? They're actually less crazy than believing that didn't happen.
Yeah.
We've got more things here like the jaguar motifs. Like look at this guy's eagle feet and jaguar head, and then compare that to what we see over here in Mesoamerica with this jaguar head and the bird feet. I mean, they're
Holy
almost
shit.
exact.
Yeah.
They're almost exact.
Look at that.
And this one dates like fairly late. These are motifs that like persisted from I think the time of these guys in La Venta. From the earliest ones show up at probably 1200 BC, and then we've got the statue that I saw. There's like 700 BC with Assyrians, And then I think they persist after the time of Christ,
But
into
they weren't, if mainstream understands correct, these weren't contemporaneous. How much would they have been separated if you looked in the textbooks?
So the handbag one, they are absolutely contemporaneous. Whereas
Okay.
this one, we've got one from that 700 BC, right? This is the
Hmm.
same type of motifs that the other Assyrian motifs are, juxtaposed with a painting that I think dates to what is this battle mirror? If I remember right, this one is from like 600 AD,
Hmm.
but the site itself was first settled. Well, there's two of them next to each other. Whichever
Hmm.
the older one is was settled at as early as 1000 BC,
Hmm.
right? But these murals themselves are probably post-Christian, right? These are probably
Okay.
Classic Age. So anyway, we got more here. I mean, even the way that they put them together, like the bird motif and the jaguar motif, where we've got the Horus
Hmm.
figurine, they're just really similar. Here's one that's also crazy similar, and these ones date to about the same age, right? So we've got one of these ivories that you find. I think this is a Nimrod ivory, where he's trampling a calf. You got a griffin, right? He's like got a cat tail, bird head, right? Trampling a
Yeah.
captive. Same thing here, and you can't really see on this one so much, but there's two or three of these griffin-like creatures, and they have cat
Yeah.
tails. So it's like, what are the chances? Once again, you've got
Yeah.
like such specific ideas. The way that he's
And
trampling
that's
the
a
captive,
three-way.
and
That's Egypt, Assyria, and Mesoamerica,
yeah,
all
yeah,
demonstrating that same figure.
yeah. And this Chalcanzingo, I mean,
Yeah.
Chalcanzingo dates to 800 BC, to the same age.
Trampling on a captive. My God.
Yeah,
That strains credulity. The most reasonable thing you can assume is that there was something
yeah.
connecting them. And yeah.
Yeah, I honestly think they're even trying to portray the same ideas. Like you see the kind of the horse disc on his head, like this
Hmm.
fire or something that's on his head. They're using some kind of a different glyph to try and even portray some kind of a similar idea. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't know how they were using that fire, but I'll bet it was in a similar way that the Egyptians and some of these, like this one is actually found in Syria, but it probably came from Egypt. But they're using the same motifs. You've got a lot of like battle stuff. Like, so once again, this rock right here is at that same site, Chalcanzingo, dates to like 800 BC. And you look at these tools that they have, like whether this is some kind of a ceremonial club or a true battle axe or something. You
Hmm.
find the same thing here, right? And this one comes from Babylon. Like these are Babylonian motifs. Look at the horns on this figurine from the Near East and how it
Hmm.
matches his horns. So you've just got, and these guys have beards, these.
Yeah.
So, and there's supposedly Mesoamerican motifs, and there's just tons of people with beards. You've got shaft tombs in West Mexico that really match well with some of the Mycenaean shaft tombs. Some of the guys in Mexico just have such like even they almost look like Spanish people, just an interesting Mediterranean
Hmm.
feel to their artwork.
Hmm.
This West Mexico, even the way they hold their hands, the way their eyes are done, there's so many motifs. One of the ones that I think is really interesting is let's see, this one right here. So there's even texts within the Babylonian records, like this Ibusin. So this is a quote, right, from a Babylonian text saying, "The god of this country, the mighty king, king of Ur, the king of the four quarters, his red Melura dog from Maraisi, brought by them as tribute, a replica of it fashioned and for his life dedicated." So we have these like red dogs that it's talking about from some faraway land.
Yeah.
Well, if you were even to just tell someone in Mesoamerica, like, hey, I found a red dog figurine. Like,
Yeah.
where do you think it's from, and what do you think it dates to? Like, they would automatically know exactly where it's from because this is a very popular West Mexican motif, right? So,
Huh.
and they're in the shaft tomb tradition. So the same shaft tombs I was just talking about, they find these red dogs. They're very popular in that area of West Mexico right
I've
now.
got a
They're
little
used.
hairless Mexican dog, and they are rumored to have come from Chinese traders, silver traders, that they would
Yeah,
keep them for warmth. Little
yeah,
hairless dog. He's
yeah,
15.
yeah,
He may date back to that age, but
yeah.
yeah, he's
And I wonder, that would be like a whole nother field of study someone could open up to see if we could find some kind of genetic ties between Native American dog breeds and China.
back to the shaft tomb. Have you looked at the shaft of Osiris? That's not terribly different from what that looks like on the Giza Plateau.
Yeah, so I mean, Egypt is full of shaft tombs. right?
Yeah.
They've got Mycenaean shaft tombs, they've got Sardinian shaft tombs, they've got Egyptian shaft tombs, and then they've got these West Mexican shaft tombs. And they're hard to find. In West Mexico, it's kind of like most of them have been looted, and if they find them, they're someone who found them and is like put them in their private collection now because they're all really deep.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, there's just there's so much stuff, and this is kind of a funny one too
Oh
because a
yeah,
lot of
I
times
love
people
this one.
will like they'll accuse in debates. You always hear like the academics accuse people of like moving the goalpost, but here we have the academic community like absolutely moving the goalpost because
Yeah.
an academic might be like, there's no evidence of transoceanic, pre-Columbian travel, and you'd be like, well, yeah, you know what? There was this figurine. Like they'll be like, well, but none of them have been found in context of like academic context. Like this one was found in an academic context. This was found
Well,
by
it
an
clearly was
archaeologist,
slipped in
by his
it's slipped in there by one of the volunteer diggers
exactly,
or the grad student.
exactly,
That's the next
yeah,
step. Yeah.
exactly. They move the goalpost and they say, oh yeah,
Well,
somebody planted it. Even though you can get online and read this guy's notes and how he trusted the grad student that found it. It's like, there's no way that he planted this. Like this was an undisturbed second subfloor within this Toluca structure. And we're finding these Etruscan figurine heads. And these are popular motifs. We find Etruscan figurines all over the Near East, all the way to India. So we know they were trading them to India, right? So why not be trading them to Mesoamerica?
yeah.
And this would have dated, somewhere between probably 400 BC to even up to the Christian era, right? But this is in Toluca. We've got other motifs that are like, if you've seen this motif here of the Izapa stela, the connections that it has to Egyptian prayer motifs, like, so within the Egyptian motif, you have this sacred tree, right? The lotus tree. And out of the sacred tree comes the goddess. And the goddess kind of usually brings a libation out of the sacred tree and gives it to, whatever kind of supplicants you've got. But you see how we've got that exact motif in all four of these. And then here in this Izapa on the left is a Mesoamerican Izapa figurine. And here we've got kind of this like beam coming out of the sacred tree, right, to these supplicants. And there's so many, almost every aspect of this tree ties into some kind of Egyptian iconography, right? So from the tree to the goddess that comes out of the tree. In this case, we've got like Ramses, who's the one coming out of the tree instead of the goddess. But look at on either side, you've got your kind of ibis god, right? You got Thoth and Sekhmet. So one god's being portrayed as an ibis and one god's being portrayed as a feline. Well, you've got the same thing in the Izapa stela, because on one side you've got an avian god, and on the other side you've got a feline god. So you've got like this cat and this bird on both sides, and they portray them different ways. Sometimes in Egypt it could be, Sekhmet might be a cat, and other times it might be a woman. So there's a lot of variation in there. So once again, if you see a lot of variation in the Mesoamerican motifs, you shouldn't be like, oh, that totally is too different. That's not the same. It's like, no, like recognize the motifs because they're really similar. The earth bar is another popular one. You see this earth bar that you find underneath the barge in most of these Egyptian motifs. They got the same earth bar in the Mayan Izapa motif.
Yeah.
You've got, like, you can see their headdresses. There's so much information they're trying to convey in these hieroglyphics with the way that they create their headdresses. And you've got the same kind of things in the Oaxacan tombs, right? Oaxacan art, the Isthmian script, even some of the early Mayan scripts, they're doing the same thing with the headdresses, where they're trying to convey a lot of information within the headdress. We just don't really know what it's saying, right?
Right. But it's the same conveyance.
Yeah.
On the other side of the world. Yeah.
And so with that same Izapa stela, you can see the Izapa stela, the roots of the tree are almost kind of like this god that's reaching through the earth bar into the underworld, right? And we've got the waters beneath, which is probably like a peppy, like the Egyptian motifs of the Nile and how it was kind of their underworld, right? And the ship sailing on their underworld. But you can see this guy reaching through. And here's here's the earth bar. He's reaching through the earth bar, right? And the same motifs are prevalent in Egypt, where you have kind of this crocodile die.
He's reaching through.
So in this case, you would have, for some reason, the tree or the plants have a root system that is portraying some type of a god that is going under the earth into the waters beneath, right? So maybe kind of trying to portray the idea of death, right? And so he's dying and going into the underworld. And who is the god that they kind of portray as somebody kind of reaching under the underworld? It is a crocodile type of character, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that is what we see in Egypt, right? With Sobek, because Sobek is the same idea. He's always this crocodile motif that is associated with the underworld and taking people from, the terrestrial world down under into the underworld. right? And here you can see Sobek associated with like this huge scepter, that's also trying to portray a bunch of the same kind of things are happening. Here's the sacred tree again,
Oh, I see the
and the
croc head
scepter.
down at the very bottom
Yep, yep.
on
We've
the
got the
left.
croc head in the bottom,
Okay,
croc head in the bottom versus just the crocodile as a standing figure, but
gotcha.
the same motifs, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean, someone once again is going to have to kind of guess that it's like, oh well, on different parts of the world, they all just really liked birds and crocodiles. Once again, you just well then why don't you see those motifs in Australia? Why don't you see them in North Europe or Russia? You
Yeah.
don't.
Excellent point.
These are really specific religious iconography where they're pulling certain animal motifs into their religious systems, but they're very specific. Near East and Mesoamerica.
Fantastic.
So, and I mean, we've got. Let's see. I'm gonna skim through some of these kind of quick. Yeah, these Mesoamerican figurines are actually pretty interesting too. When you go back even to Olmec times, you've got a lot of things tying into this Near East. So here in Egypt, they almost used like these kind of like dwarf bald men, and some speculate that these were courtesans, like part of the court. They're who knows what role they're playing.
Yeah.
But they seem to be playing a major role in both Olmec art and in Egyptian art.
Well,
Kind of
that
this
Mexican dude's
fat
the same as
baby.
an Egyptian. There ain't no doubt about it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and in his face, like you might see these things if you weren't familiar with the Mesoamerican motifs. You'd be like, "Oh, that's just fake. Someone made that."
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, look at his face. No, that is clearly an Olmec facial feature, right?
Uh-huh.
There's all sorts of stuff where you've got bearded figures in Mesoamerica. You've got stuff even down in Brazil where they find stones that, and it used to be without the internet, these things were so scattered that people would find them and they'd be like, oh, this doesn't go with our prevailing view. There were no people here before Columbus, and so this is obviously fake. But even today, maybe if something like this was found, they might be like, well, maybe it's not fake.
Tell us more
Maybe you
about
should.
this. So this is a stone found in Brazil, dismissed by scholars.
Yeah, this is Paraiba stone, but it's a clearly Phoenician inscription carved in stone, and so they think it was planted. And I would have too, right? Like a lot of these things, if you found them as a scattered thing and you didn't know about the other stuff, you would just think they were planted. Like that's the easiest explanation. But now when we start to get all of these scattered ideas and we bring them together into a singular book or whole and realize, well, there's too many. Like there's so many, and some of them you can't plant. Some of them are stelas that are like bigger than cars, like the ones we've been looking at. These can't be planted. And so what we need to do is go back and look at the ones that we said were planted and decide if maybe they weren't planted. Maybe if these were just dismissed. And I really have faith that the scholarly consensus is going to change on this soon. Like I think within the next 10 years, we will have the entire scholarly consensus agree that these can't be dismissed.
Yeah,
there
I
was
think
definitely
Cosmic Summit 3-time speaker Scott Walters done great work with this.
yeah. And
so
I'm going to get into
it's
some
not that easily dismissed. You've got to have a lot of very, very bored people who are willing to plant something and then die, or the rest of their life have no one find it.
Yeah.
They're in obscure places. Why would you do that? Who would get their jollies carving that into rock and not have the satisfaction of seeing the later debate or whatnot? It makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, Scott's a man after my own heart.
Is he? Yeah.
For sure.
Well, we'll have you at the Cosmic Summit and you two can mind meld, man. So it says they came out of the Red Sea with 10 ships for 2 years around Africa, separated by the hand of ball, no longer with their companions. So we came here, 12 men, 3 women, to a new shore. Well,
yeah. And like along with Scott, what you're saying, this sounds a lot like some of the Viking rune stones that we see up in Minnesota and that. They're kind of similar things where they're telling a story of them traveling, And once again, like you might think, oh, you find a rune stone, oh, this was just like some early Finnish person who happened to know runic. But it's like once you start to put these all together, like no, these tell a story. And the story is that it wasn't Columbus that it was the first, and it wasn't Eric the Red. The people have been coming between the continents from time immortal. Like the only question we should be asking ourselves is, when was the first?
Yeah.
Was it at the Egyptian pyramids?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Assyrian stuff. I mean, maybe you've seen some of these, like the Hearn tablet, the Shawnee Creek stone, Chief Joseph tablet. These are all just kind of like Assyrian trinkets that got passed down. for generations, but are of obvious Old World origin. The Fuente Magna Bowl, we've got more ancient Babylonian script in South America this time. And obviously here it's mixed with some South American motifs. Like this frog motif, we see that in the Near East, we see it in South America, but we also see it in Mesoamerica, right? You go in Oaxaca, there's some really strong frog motifs in both Oaxaca and in the Mayan lands. The goblin, fanged gorgons.
We still do retain, maybe that's archetypal, because we still have the frog motif in Pepe, the little frog you see on the internet.
That's true. That's true. You know what? And it's weird. Like, so Scott is another great example of this, because you have these organizations like the Masonic organizations, right?
Yeah.
And they are passing down very, very old motifs for hundreds and hundreds of years. Right. A lot of people might think like the Masons started, in the 17 or 1600s. It's like baloney. I mean, look at the Greek mystery cults of Rome, right? Rome had these mystery cults that were very similar. Who knows if their ceremonies have probably morphed quite a bit from them to the Masonic clubs. But I mean, when you look at the, what were they called? There's hundreds of these underground, basically Masonic temples that they find in Rome and all the way around Rome, and they're Persian mystery cults that are passing down this really old information. I'll talk about the Kolbrin in a second, because the Kolbrin has a bunch of the ceremonies that are part of these kind of small groups that pass down ancient knowledge for hundreds of years.
Gorgons,
okay. So the Gorgons, I think these are just interesting because both of these, you see these. This is South America, right? This is South America. These are all in Chavín de Juntar, right? And Chavín de Juntar, I guess, has like motifs that are really similar to what you find in Monte Alban, Mexico, which, I mean, that's like 4,000 miles apart, but we know that there was a lot of trade between Mesoamerica and South America. So, I mean, why is it so hard to then believe that these are part of the same tradition, the same art tradition that's coming from the Greeks, right? Yeah. Because we find that same type of thing in Greece, and we find it to this day up in Tibet, right? And in Asia. Like, these are global motifs that I don't think just like arose independently. I think that there is some type of cultural diffusion going on here, and it's persisting. Yeah. So this is just another example of Monte Alban and Chavín de Juntar. Super interesting motif. This one is a crazy one. Like, so you see there's faces. This is in South America.
Yeah.
So on the left, we've got the Chavín de Juntar site in South America. And on the right, we've got the Monte Alban site in Oaxaca, Mexico. But you see kind of their facial expressions and just kind of the type of artwork. Very similar. And these date to very similar dates, but thousands of miles apart. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the Kolbrin real quick, and then we'll wrap up some of this stuff and jump back into geology a little bit. Okay, so the Kolbrin, if you haven't heard of the Kolbrin, you should. So anybody watching, check this thing out, right? I have a huge article on it on my website, but the Kolbrin is really fascinating. This is a full book. Instead of an archaeological site that's totally dismissed by mainstream scholars, this is a book that's dismissed by mainstream scholars. And there's a couple sections of it that is like, sure, it's a compilation of books. It's like 1,000 pages long. And so it's just a compilation of histories. The first third of it is like Egyptian stories. So these are supposedly all Egyptian manuscripts that compose the first third of the book. And then the middle third is kind of like ancient English history. And then the last third is more modern, like probably from like the time of Christ to as late as even 1200 AD to Norman times in England. So there's just tons of stories in there. And some of the stories, maybe they're suspect. Like there's a story in there about Moses. And so that kind of story, I always speculate that that's probably suspect. Like if someone's going to write a fake history, they're going to pick some major religious icon like Moses or David or something like that. Right. They're going to write a fake thing around it. So it's like, if you want to dismiss that, sure. Maybe that story is fake. And in fact, the very end, it says this was added to the manuscript as of length, and we don't know its provenance. So that it's like, maybe that part's fake. But there is so much in this book that I am absolutely convinced is legit.
Kolbrin? I'm somewhat familiar with it, but just so people understand, where was it found? Why is it disputed?
So it's disputed because its origin is so enigmatic. Like we don't really understand where it came from, other than that it first showed up just before World War II. Okay. The first publishing of it is like just before World War II. And the story goes that there was some Hermetic order, like the Masons that we were talking about
Right.
before, that called themselves the Coldies. Called themselves, in
Oh,
fact, the people who publish it right now call themselves the Coldies Trust.
okay.
And so these Coldies, like the Colden orders, that's not that's like rooted in history, right? There's a Wikipedia article on the Coldies that you could actually go read about. So they were like ascetic monastic orders. So if you can just kind of picture all through the Middle Ages, you had these little libraries that were managed by these monastic religious orders. And so the idea is that one of these religious orders had been gathering up books and preserved them, where the rest of them destroyed anything that stunk of paganism, right?
Hmm.
Especially when the Normans came through, right? When the Normans
Hmm.
came into northern, anything that wasn't like Christian, through
Hmm.
that Christianization period of England, they kind of destroyed the ancient Near
Scrubbed
Eastern
it.
and Egyptian manuscripts, and just left stuff that was like fully Christian. But so this says though that England was settled, and we know that there were 10 mines that date all the way back to the Bronze Age, right? That they were using from the Near East. So this isn't far fetched, but the Kolbrin says, and is the history, and says like we came from this place in the Near East. We came from this place, and they never use the same words as Egypt, you know. But they basically say that they're Egyptian and Greek and Turkish groups that are coming into England somewhere between 1200 and 600 BC and creating advanced colonies.
Wow.
So and within there it has a couple gems because there's a couple sections that talk about people sailing across the eastern or the Western Ocean, right?
Where do you think the similarity to the Book of Mormon? What are your thoughts there?
So this really is interesting. Like I have a whole, I mean, I was raised Mormon, so I have a lot
Mhm.
of interesting stuff when it comes to Mormonism, and it kind of piques my interest in this idea of transoceanic travel because the Book of Mormon, you know, once again, it's a channeled text, just like these other crazy wild texts, you
Mhm.
know. So you've got kind of that interesting idea of a channeled text on top of transoceanic travel because it's telling
Mhm.
about different groups that are coming from Babylonian in one case and Israel in another case. And what's really interesting about the Kolbrin is the Kolbrin has like this central section, and it's only 2 books, where this group called the Sons of Light are coming from somewhere in the Middle East. And the
Hmm.
Sons of Light is actually the same name that the people who did the why am I mind just go blank? The Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The Dead
Yeah.
Sea Scrolls group called themselves
Scenes.
the Sons of Light. Yeah, the Essene group was called
Yeah.
themselves the Sons of Light. And so that I think is really crazy. It's like, okay, now we
Intrigued.
have a tie to Israel. We have a,
Yeah.
and within like Christian mythology in England, there's a lot of kind of like wild stories about people saying, yeah, we know that we've got like some kind of Israelite ties in England. Well,
Yeah.
the Kolbrin substantiates that in at least one specific book. And so once again, you could take this book and you could throw it out and you could say, well, this book is suspect because once again, we're talking about, you know, groups that if you're going to make a fake, it'd probably be like this. But I mean, honestly, the Kolbrin is more convincing than the Book of Mormon in the way that it never mentions the name Israel.
Huh.
It just gives you indicators that lets you understand this. Like, yeah, I think this it gives one city, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the city was, but it is a city in Israel where this guy Hoshkia comes from. And Hoshkia is like a king, and then he comes and he forms a colony in England. So it's that same kind of Book of Mormon esque idea where we've got like this this group who comes and creates a colony in England, right? And then they have ties to the New World too, because it tells about them going across the sea and talking to the Red Man.
Oh, really?
Yep, and that's only a tiny part, like just like
Sure.
3 or 4 verses. But
Yeah.
and at first you think, well, that seems crazy, but then you start getting into other British annals and history, and you've got Brendan the Navigator. I mean, you've got
Mm.
2 or 3 stories in England of people who said that they went across the Western Sea to some unknown land. You know, kind of like the whole Atlantis thing. They're going across the Western Sea and finding some crazy unknown land. So very interesting.
Indeed.
And you've got ties between like the archaeology. You know, if you've looked at Laventa and Salisbury Hill, there's some interesting similarities in their celestial alignments to the nature of the hill itself.
Hmm.
You've got sections in the Kolbrin that talk about things that match with the Mayan calendar, right? Because they talk about the way that they divide the year a great year of 52 years, which is, that's how the Mayan calendar is laid out. So it's kind of wild.
Oh wow. Okay.
I wonder how, before World War II, when we have the first instance of the Kolbrin, how would they even know that? How would
Yeah.
they know to associate the 52-year calendar in some
Yeah.
obscure verse of their book to, anyway, it seems
Yeah.
kind of
It's not
wild
a
to me.
good fake if people would know what the hell you're talking about, but it
Yeah.
matches later understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. They've got sections in there talking about the eagle and the serpent. And they're talking about it like it's coming from the Near East, even though we know those things are most closely tied to Mesoamerica, right? Their motifs, their mythological motifs. The brothers, that's a huge one for both North American and Mesoamerican Native American
Yeah.
groups,
There they are. Yeah.
and how that ties into Egyptian motifs. So, I mean, it just, I won't go through all these because it goes on and on and on. There's just so many. I don't know how you can dismiss them. Oh, okay. Let me talk about one thing real quick, and then let's go back to geology. Okay, so in the Kolbrin,
Yeah.
which is one of the things that it's just really cool and really interesting. So I read this book multiple times. I love these old texts, right?
Yeah.
And I have an article in my website on the Kolbrin. So if you want to go to it, I go through and talk about how many pharaohs it mentions, and yeah, they're always named differently. And so you have to,
Uh-huh.
like, there's one it calls Nabianten, which is very obviously a story of Akhenaten. So it
Yeah.
calls it Nabianten, but we know from history it's pronounced Akhenaten. But they're
Right.
the same person, absolutely. But in there, it does a similar thing where it talks about a pharaoh named Atmos. So not Amos, but Atmos.
Uh-huh.
And it says how he was at war with a red-haired warrior from the Levant, right? And I can't remember what the words it gives, but it's basically talking about in Israel. I think it says to the north or whatever, some redhead warrior to Israel. And then it gives this story about how the redhead warrior, oh, he calls him an Abramite, and his daughters were defrauded and raped. And it basically tells in a roundabout way the story of Tamar in the Bible. And I recognized that when I saw it. I'm like, whoa, this is definitely David. Doesn't mention him by name. I'm like, this is definitely David. And then it's like, but it's putting him with this pharaoh named Atmos. And I'm going through all of my Egyptian chronology. So I'm really interested in Egyptian chronology. And I'm like, dang, I mean, that's kind of wild. I've speculated, because I've read all of Manetho, Herodotus, all the early histories from Eusebius and Jerome to Josephus, all of the versions of Herodotus that we have, and Manetho. And so I was like, what if this is legit? Like, I'm just going to flesh this out. What if we say if that's legit, and Amos, who is the first pharaoh of the New Kingdom, who right now, following our chronology from Manetho, we put him at like almost 1500 BC, right? A lot of people try to correlate him with like Moses in the Bible, right? So Amos, but this is correlating it with David. So it's offsetting the chronology by 500 years. So I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy. That's crazy, but let's pull on this string and see what else we find, right? Yeah. And so I created an entire chronology where I then shifted things 500 years and just saw where it led me.
Yeah.
And I tell you, like, where it led, I'm not even going to go here, but I'm writing an entire book on this because it is absolutely fantastic. It is. This is one thing that I am very, very confident in.
Haven't many others done that though? The 500-year shift suggested that.
I've found that Velikovsky is similar, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And
yeah,
I still to this day, I have not read his books because I don't want his stuff like influencing me fleshing it out by myself. But the little bits I've ended up running against, I think that he's close. He's not the same, but he's close. He's putting the New Kingdom in that same idea where it's like the kings of Israel in the Bible would actually correlate with the New Kingdom.
Right.
And when you do that, you find like really like the science, the archaeology starts matching up because as of now,
matches
like,
Akhenaten and Moses, right?
No. That's the current. That's the current one, right? It says Akhenaten, the current idea of Akhenaten is he lived at like 1250 BC. And so most people say, well, the Bible says Moses lived at like 1500 BC. So maybe we can just go 250 years and meet both ways and say that Akhenaten is about the time of Moses.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I say
differ with that.
Totally differ. Because when you start to do those correlations, like you still have the archaeology in Israel fall apart to where nobody believes that like the Bible says, that David and Saul and Solomon conquered all the way from Egypt to the Euphrates. There's no evidence of that between our current idea of Egyptian 1000 to 1500 BC. There's no evidence of it. But if you do this shift that I do, then it's like, whoa, okay, because we do see in Avaris, the Hyksos come into Egypt and rule Egypt during that, is that first intermediate period or the second intermediate period? Whichever the two, right? They conquer Egypt, essentially, right? After kind of its collapse. And then they rule all of Lower Egypt or Upper Egypt from Avaris. So my correlation would say that the Hyksos are not Israelites like so many try to pin them. They are actually the Amorites and the Amalekites of the Bible that lived before the time of David, and that David and Saul conquered. Right? So
we've got some real Egypt geeks in our, I guess you call it fan base, followers, whatnot. Where could they see the Weaver chronology?
So this right here is an overview of it.
Is it on your website?
I have kind of it, but it's so like hodgepodged.
Yeah.
I have an article that I'm doing it. Like, but if somebody is really interested in it, what they can do is they can email me, and I can, like right here is my, like all of my notes are on this massive thing right here. So if you kind of see,
guy to be so OCD, man. I love the earth coughs up people like you, Lance. I've just met too many of them. It's just such a big planet, and it's amazing that people will come forth and put the energy and curiosity into this. What a great example. So these are your notes, huh?
Yeah. And my brain never turns off. But
it never turns off, huh?
I'll tell you, this solves so many problems when it comes to the Bronze Age collapse, when it comes to correlating the Bible with this Kolbrin. I mean, man, I would have never gotten this without that. I would have never, without that one nail, I would have never like pulled on that string. But when you do pull on that string, holy cow, it really does have a lot of, I'm not going to go into this, but if you go to, I have a Demystify Science interview where I kind of go, maybe we can actually do another one where I hit this, and I will go one at a time, and you'll see how it's like, well, even like the Battle of Jericho, like we find that Jericho has a huge collapse layer, and with this timeline, it absolutely matches what the Bible says of when they came in, and so Jericho could have been collapsed. And even Israel, when it comes to the conquest of Israel, there's really no good data, no good archaeological evidence that the conquest by Joshua of Israel, of the Holy Land, ever really happened, right? But when you change the timeline like this, it's like, holy cow, there's a huge collapse right there. It fits perfectly, right? And then it makes it so David.
I might be framing this wrong, but what happened to the time?
It's made up.
Was it made up, or?
It's made up in the later years because they're calling the same person two different people.
Okay.
Right? So if you see here how it's like my 26th dynasty, this is the big one right here. The 18th dynasty actually matches with the 22nd dynasty.
Okay.
Right. So the 18th dynasty, we have like great archaeology for it, great history for it. And then you've got dynasties like the 22nd dynasty that it's like you don't. And so if you...
Because they couldn't go find the same location twice and attribute it to different time periods.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, what it is you have like recorded history. So stuff that we know from, because starting at about, Herodotus, like starting around 400, BC, the Persian period, as soon as we hit the Persian period, we have like really good history. Yeah. Whereas when you're trying to dig through the New Kingdom, the 18th and 19th dynasty, it's almost entirely archaeological. Mm-hmm. And so we've got written history and then we've got archaeological history, and they've mistaken the two, right? And they've put them like this when in fact they're contemporary. And the reason why that's happened is because of the Hallstatt Plateau. So, and this is another thing, like a lot, whether it be archaeologists who don't really have a really strong geological background, and so they don't understand the assumptions that radiocarbon is placed on, and they don't really understand like the Hallstatt Plateau and how, I think right now that people are starting to get this stuff a lot better. But
is that a radiocarbon plateau?
Yeah. So like the InCal curve where you have radiocarbon dates have to be calibrated because you can have anomalies in both solar influx and in the strength of the magnetic field, right? So the Hallstatt Plateau is like a early Iron Age anomaly where you probably had a really strong magnetic field. And so it absolutely just messes up the radiocarbon dates. And my idea would be that, like I have in my, you can even see, right? Where did that go? Like I say, if you're interested in this, like co-author some papers with me, call me up And I have so much data.
Do it, people.
But these are all the radiocarbon
Yeah.
dates. You can see that right now. They know that the radiocarbon dates are off by like 250 years, and so they're correlating them. They're bringing them up to 250 years. My idea is that no, you guys took them the wrong direction. You brought them up to 250 years when you need to make them go back 250 years because they're actually off by 250 years in the other direction. And so it's not a debate of whether the radiocarbon dates are wrong. We know the radiocarbon dates are wrong. The Encalc curve supposedly takes that into account, but it takes it into account wrong. Right. And if you just do it the other direction, then suddenly it solves a lot of really cool problems. So, but let's jump off of this. But I am like, hit me up if you're interested in this, and I will try by within a couple of months to put together a really good article and outline. And I would love help if someone wants to jump in and try and co-author.
Oh, we'd love to have you back on to flesh it all out. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is a really it's a really cool idea, and it solves a lot of really cool problems. All right, so let's just kind of circle back, and maybe we'll decide if we want to pick up another day on some of these things, or how much we want to go off on it.
Well, let's do some geology. Tell us what do you think about catastrophism, and what are your observations?
Okay. Yeah, and I'll say people can go to my site and kind of check out some of the stuff because I've got a lot of really interesting information on the Vikings and how much Viking evidence there is in the New World of how the Vikings correlate with the Austronesians, how they were doing actually global trade networks between the Normans and the Austronesians in Indonesia. Anyway, tons of information. But yeah, so geology. All right, so after all of this, and like I said, I'm just giving the tiniest little taste of the bulk of my research. I've got so much stuff. I have now been convinced, right, that at least back to the LGM, right, to the last glacial maximum, at least back to before the Younger Dryas, right, that we have history totally wrong, and that there really have been periodic disasters. Right. And I think those disasters happen every 3,000 years, give or take 1,000 years. So every 2,000 to 3,000 years. Right. And I have a whole model that I'm working on. Once again, if people are interested, hit me up. And if especially if you got some like credentials and you really are good at writing papers. I have so much research, but when it comes to actually sitting down and writing out the paper, I usually I hate writing papers.
Oh, it's tough.
And I hate the peer review process. I have a lot of peer reviewed papers, and
oh yeah, no, it's completely
I don't have
broken.
patience. I don't have patience.
Yeah. The Comet Research Group, we had to just break away and kind of start a peer reviewed journal, which is very, very high quality, just to shorten the timelines from glacial to human. Uncertainty. Yeah.
I'm glad it exists though. So I just want someone to jump on with me and kind of try and solve these problems. Okay, so the 3,000, if you think about the Dansgaard events, the DO events, right? Dansgaard-Oshler events, they show a pretty strong periodicity of every 3,000 years. Okay, and I wonder if I have a slide on this. Let me see if I do really quick.
Take your time.
I think it's in my... In fact, let me just go to my article here. Let's see, which one here is it? And let's go down to, see if I can find this. Because this really, I think, is a big key in solving the issue, right? So if you look at the marine isotope stages.
Yeah.
Okay, so my idea, remember, is that there is a change in the geographic spin axis to the Earth that goes all the way 700 to 1,000 miles between ice ages and interstadials. Okay. And this is bonkers. Like, once again, this is a very out there idea, right? But I'm saying, hey, look into it, because I get it. Once upon a time, I thought there's just no way. But now I'm being like, no, there is a way, and it's not that hard. Okay. Yeah. And I will write this book, but the basis for that, though, is what if you look at all this geologic data and ice age data, and every time you see one of these huge swings in the oxygen isotope ratios, right, that you are thinking are having to do with Milankovitch cycles, well, because they do, right, but that the pull is actually changing in every one of those. It's doing this, right? Just let that like tease your mind every one of these is basically a major pole shift, right?
And do you think that was that sudden, and that was the origin of the repeated catastrophes?
Okay, so then I'll lay out my theory from the beginning because I think that there's two things going on here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that's going on is precession. Okay, just the Milankovitch cycles, with precession being the leading indicator, right?
Mm-hmm.
So precession has the Earth doing this big 24,000 loop, right? 24,000 year loop.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these gravitational pulls that are pulling on the core, right? And they are irregularly pulling on the core because of eccentricity, right? You could say that it would be all completely uniform if it weren't for the fact that eccentricity, and the thing that people rarely take into effect, is the tilt of our solar system, the ecliptic, right, to the sun's equator, right?
Okay.
So our planet does not orbit at an exact, right? We know that we're 23 degrees off in our axis, but the moon, like the Earth in itself, as it orbits the sun, does not
Yeah.
orbit completely uniformly. It is like 9 degrees off the orbital plane of the sun, like the
It
equatorial
9
plane of
degrees
the
off
sun,
that the ecliptic of the other planets as
of the
well?
sun, of the sun.
Of the
Yeah, yeah,
But the
yeah.
sun doesn't have an ecliptic itself, does
Well,
it?
so I'm using the wrong words here because solar equator,
Okay, the solar equator. Okay,
right,
we're
right,
not our circle, if you will, our orbit is tilted with regard to the equator of the sun
and the other planets. Okay,
and the other planets.
yeah, it's like 9 degrees or 7 degrees, I think it is, from the solar equator, but then a couple degrees off. Every planet's a little different. So I mean, these are all kind of like well understood things because they factor into the Milankovitch cycles and how you have non-uniform gravitational fields pulling on the Earth-Moon system, right? And so anyway, that is also pulling on the core of the Earth, ever so slightly. And so then you have irregularities in the gravitational pull on both the Earth itself and the core. Hold that really quick. Okay, so wait.
Yep.
You gotta bear with me here because this is kind of so
Oh.
complicated. I'm gonna try and make it make sense. All right, so we have these non-uniform forces that are actually kind of moving one from the other and storing up strain. But what you have is that the equatorial bulge of the Earth, which kind of keeps the spin axis in place, is so strong that you need something like really strong. You almost need some kind of a jolt to, let's say that, like, just picture this. So let's say you have the core, right? And the core is getting these non-uniform gravitational forces on it. And they're actually pulling out gases more than anything out of the core. And so you have an outgassing process as they call it the freezing of the core. So the core is accreting or freezing. The inner core is accreting or freezing outer core liquid. And the outer core is like very, very liquid. We're talking like water, basically motor oil is the viscosity that we're talking here. And so the solid inner core is slowly accreting material to it. But then you have the outer core itself, I believe, degassing more than what they believe. Right now, they know that we've got volatiles like dropping out of the outer core and into the mantle. And they're helping to create these low velocity shear zones, right? So you've got these huge low velocity shear zones that, I mean, maybe I have a picture of those so people know what I'm talking about. But they are basically mass imbalances. God, I've got so much information here. Yeah, so these are all from Ethical Skeptical did some great illustrations of these. A lot of them are just on Wikipedia. But, right, so these huge low velocity shear zones, and they're only part of it because out of them you have huge mantle plumes. And so you've got mantle plumes and low velocity shear zones that they're not sure exactly what their composition is and exactly what their density is, right? But my speculation is that what's going on is that you've got degassing going out from the inner core, and it slowly ends up creating an imbalance in the Earth, but that imbalance cannot overcome the inertia that is maintained by the equatorial bulge. Right. So in and of itself, it's like you've got this balance and it kind of like builds up and builds up, builds up. But it's not, if we didn't have an equatorial bulge, everything would just slowly change, right, all the time. But because that bulge is so good at keeping up, even though now that you have a volumetric or density imbalance within the Earth, it still keeps its same spin axis, right? And so we need something to kick it. It's almost like you have this top and it's got this slight imbalance because maybe you dropped a piece of ketchup on the top of it and it's kind of like dripped down the side of it. Right, and created this imbalance, but it's not going to move. But once you touch it, like all it needs is the littlest kick, to make that imbalance suddenly overcome the counter forces that exist to keep the spin axis at
Then it
itself.
cascades like anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then there's multiple things that can give that kick. So in some cases, I think that there have probably been just comets, right? So if, like, for instance, if a comet, if it weren't for this system, right, if we just had everything in balance, it would take a comet like the size of the moon to hit the Earth and change the spin axis, right? Not that big, but huge. It would be a planet killer.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking about a comet like bigger than what killed the dinosaurs. It would take something that big.
Yeah, I've
like
always had a problem with theories that say, okay, something hit the Earth and it tilted the Earth. It just seems a little, I don't think we'd be here.
Well, and the physics just don't work, right?
Yeah.
Because you just require such a huge, exactly, like you're saying, such a huge hit. We wouldn't be here if it was big enough to do it, unless you have an imbalance that's already been created. Does that make sense? So you have to have a mechanism that creates that imbalance before you're going to try and posit that maybe something like a comet changes the actual spin axis of the Earth, right? But that's not my main thing. I think that is kind of a thing that happens once in a while, but not that often. But that it might actually hold sway for like the Younger Dryas and some of these things where we have good evidence of a comet correlating with a strong climate swing.
Well, good. Don't throw out the comet theory. I'm published on it.
Yeah.
Even though I have many guests that do, and I have no problem with people.
I've seen your comet thing, but I'm giving meat to that because I really think that is plausible combined with the existing mass imbalance. Okay, but what's going on with the rest is bigger. Okay, and this is something that, like, honestly came to me like in almost a vision almost 20 years ago. So bear with me on the idea, because that we wouldn't see any periodicity with comets, right? Like, it's pretty hard to try and kind of come up with some kind of an idea that maybe the comets are hanging out in some 5-4 frequency in the solar system, and we hit them in because we have our absolute periodicity. And so you have to follow the Milankovitch periodicity first of all, right? And I've done that, and I'll lay this all out in my book because I mean it's really pretty awesome. But we have to have something that does the kicking on a periodic schedule too, right? So we have here the Dansgaard-Oschler events that show very strongly that every 3,000 years, the North Pole is cooling while the South Pole is warming, right? And so the seesaw hypothesis, right? We would expect, so if, first of all, if it was just happening every 12,000 years with the precessional cycle, we would expect to see only a strong climate signal happening every 12,000 years. But that's not true, right? We see periodicity in the 100,000 year period. We see periodicity in the 24,000 year period, which are explained great by the Milankovitch cycle. So we know that whatever is happening, if it is affecting the spin axis and not just the climate, it has to be connected to the Milankovitch cycles. But we also see these 3,000 year cycles, and they are strong, right? And the prevailing view right now has to do with the North Atlantic current. And honestly, so this is a lot like the Ice Age. Like, this is one of those theories that is kind of bonkers. Like, this is the prevailing view, but the prevailing view is poor. Like, it's really bad. But I get it because it's the best we have. But the prevailing view to explain how these 3,000 year events work, these Dansgaard-Oschler events, where you have cooling in one hemisphere and warming in the other, which are explained beautifully if the geographic pole is actually wandering, right? Because your sample site is going from a higher to a lower latitude each time, right? Simple answer, super simple. They don't have that in their toolbox because they don't think that's possible. So what's their explanation? Right? Their explanation is, we have this massive North Atlantic current, and it goes all the way from pole to pole. And we all knew that it existed all the way from the Caribbean to the North Pole, but now we're going to posit that it exists not just from the Caribbean, it goes all the way around the world, and definitely from the North Pole to the South Pole, and that it's actually like taking all this huge drop of fresh water and it's dumping it into the North Atlantic, and then it's shifting it all the way to the South Pole, and that explains the Dansgaard-Oschler events. Well, it's like, that's kind of dumb, but possible until then we dig further into the data and they find out, like that signal on these is like 40 years. Like, it's within 40 years of the dumping, the cooling of the northern hemisphere that the southern hemisphere responds. So now how do you get that water from one side of the Earth to the other in 40 years? Well, now they have this even crazier idea that they're like, the current is like a string. And if you pull on one side of the string, but it's like a rigid string. So if you pull on one side of the string, the other side responds immediately, almost like electricity in a line. And it's like,
Okay.
water doesn't exist. Water doesn't work that way. I'm sorry.
Right.
Like you're just grasping at straws at this point. You're just coming up with whatever ideas you can because there's no good explanation.
Yeah.
Except for one. Like, what's the good explanation?
Oh.
The good explanation is the pole is shifting. The pole is shifting, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is it's happening every 3,000 years. It's not happening just steadily, and it's not happening every 12,000 years or every 24,000 years. So now we need a mechanism to have something that kind of like periodically hits the Earth on a 3,000-year schedule, right? To create what we see in the climate record, in the ice cores, as well as even in the pelagic ooze marine isotope data. So what could it be? All right, and this is my belief. Now, bear with me here. Everyone bear with me because I'm going into cuckoo land, but I'm going to bring it back, okay? We'll see if I can kind of convince you, all right? Do you see this little illustration here on the left?
Yeah.
That illustration is from the Crazy Channeled book from 1860, right? 1860, I think it was published in 1870.
On the bottom left.
Bottom left, right?
Yep.
Where it says Savorcum.
Okay.
Okay, and this is one of many illustrations that it has, where it talks about the great serpent of the understanding of the ancients of how we went through this web in the galaxy, right? And this is like crazy. I don't know why somebody in 1870 would even be thinking about this. This is like
right.
This is crazy. This is before plate tectonics has been invented. This is before the Milankovitch cycles has been invented. This is before all of that. And he's drawing freehand these crazy illustrations that it's all psycho stuff, but every once in a while, crazy people, hit it on the head. So
hey, you're a smart guy. You're collecting a tremendous amount of information, and you find stuff that's completely out of bounds. And if it matches, you're having to incorporate it or deny it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's tough, man. I mean, you're crossing many domains here, but you're synthesizing. Yeah.
So I'm gonna try and bring it all together. So I think what's creating this, right? And if you look in this picture to the right, I remember I saw this when it was talking about galactic harmonics once, and I'm like, dude, that's it. Like that picture on the right is the same thing that the picture on the left. So this modern double interference pattern is exactly what we see in this ancient dude's drawings. And so what's going on in this picture on the right is if you have two harmonics, like two ripple patterns, and they interfere with each other, they create that pattern. And so the way that you would idealize or illustrate this is exactly what's happening here on the right. If you took two balls, right, start with one, and you just dip it in the water, and it creates a ripple pattern, right? Concentric circles radiating outwards, right? And we all know what that pattern looks like. Well, if you take a second ball and you start dipping it in the water right next to it, well, now you have two ripple patterns, two concentric circles, and they reinforce and cancel, right? And so where the two waves reinforce, you get a wave height twice the size, but where they cancel, you have a flat, right? And so do you see these starbursts that are coming out? Can you see that? Can you see the starbursts that are coming out from?
Yeah.
So those are canceling regions of the double interference pattern. Now, and I'm working on like actually doing this in an experiment. So if someone wants to get on a YouTube channel, like I've got experiments in my head for this entire theory because it ties the entire disaster cycle together. And I am hoping that, like I said, last time, I think the first time I went on Demystify Science, I gave some of these ideas and everyone just started like running with them, but not give me credit. I want people to come on and like do this with me, right? Because this is going to revolutionize everything. It really is pretty cool.
Collaborate, don't silo, and sure as hell don't steal, because there's plenty to still understand. You don't have to be turfy. There's too much that's unknown.
Yeah, let's work together. So picture if you dumped a bunch of little styrofoam balls in this lake. Okay, where would they go? You can see this double interference pattern. Where would they go?
From the ball.
I'm going to even just make this big so everyone could see. Okay, so they'd go away from the ball, but even more than that, they would just kind of float in place. But I'm telling you that they would be pushed into the starburst. They would be pushed into the quiet zones. Right. They would be pushed into those canceling waves. Because where the waves reinforce, you have double height. Where the waves cancel, you have a quiet zone. And so the matter all the matter, all of the little balls would float into the quiet zones, into the starbursts. Okay. Now, once you've done that, now I want you to take these two balls and start rotating them. What happens to the starbursts? Can you picture it in your mind?
Rotating them? Why would
Rotate.
It
Oh, it would change the entire structure. Okay, so as soon as you start rotating them around each other, instead of them being like spokes coming out from a central wheel.
Oh, you don't mean rotating them on their own axis.
No. I mean rotating them around each other, orbiting each other.
Yeah.
Okay, as soon as they orbit each other, the pattern would look exactly like the Milky Way galaxy.
Oh, wow. Oh, you'd have a spiral.
You'd have a spiral. Each one of those quiet zones would now become an arm in the Milky Way galaxy.
Okay,
so
what's producing the two wave patterns that are interfering with each other?
So my theory is that Sagittarius A, and there are many who have actually posited this, and there's definitely some people who believe that within the last 7 million years, there was a secondary massive star or black hole of some sort that made its way into the center of Sagittarius A black hole, right? And that we're seeing its effects. But if in the proto-galaxy, right, something that at this point has started to merge, but when the galaxy itself, and some have speculated that you had two different galaxies that actually came together to create the Milky Way. But it wouldn't even take that. All it takes is two massive centers. If Sagittarius A is the combination of two masses, right, two massive black holes that in the proto-galaxy began to rotate around each other, and now maybe they're so close to each other, or maybe they've even merged by now, that you can't really see them. So all you can see is Sagittarius A. But all you need is two pulsating centers of mass to rotate around each other, right? And then they create this massive gravitational and electromagnetic pattern. And where does all the mass go? Into the quiet zones of the double interference pattern. Those are the arms of the Milky Way galaxy, right? And once it's rotating, every one of those becomes a huge arm, right? And so this is all fluid hydrodynamic theory that we use to kind of model the creation of the galaxy. So then what I posit is that double interference pattern, we see the effects of the massive waves, right? We see the arms from the quiet zones. We still see some of the intersections, right? And some of these galactic filaments that we see. But what we don't see is the third and fourth and 10th order harmonics that exist within that interference pattern. Because what those harmonics look like is exactly what I'm showing, here on the right. So we have a harmonic pattern within the galaxy. And so then as our solar system orbits the galactic core, right, in this massive circle, we end up going through reinforcing waves, right? So that when we're in canceling waves, when we're in between wave fronts, everything's hunky-dory, right? But if we've got matter that somehow is being pushed out of the reinforcing wave zones and into the quiet zones of the arms themselves, that on the smallest degree of that fractal, where you've got these tiny little things on the order of 3,000 years, we're going to be going through these basically galactic wave fronts, right? And I mean, the key to understanding them is just looking at the non-thermal galactic filaments, right? And so you have where, like right now, they kind of see them as the way that I would picture it almost is if, well, I'm not going to give this all away. I'm going to let people simmer on some of this. I'm going to let people simmer on this. Okay. But just picture that when we go through these waves, things change. We get bombarded with massive amounts of relativistic electrons, right? So it's not that just like if you watch Suspicious Observers and some of these guys who are really on to ideas and where they're kind of positing that we're heading through the skirt of the, what do they call it? The galactic disk of positive, negative forces, right? Which physicists have some issues with because the same thing exists in our planet, and it's not like it creates the kind of forces that you would need to have a true disaster cycle. But if you have these massive filaments, right, and they are conduits to huge fluxes of relativistic electrons coming from the galactic core, right? Now suddenly, as you pass through these, you could have the heliosphere easily compress. To like as much as like 1 AU. Like you could have the heliosphere compress to a tenth of its normal size. And as soon as that happens, that the heliosphere compresses and the Earth compresses, right? Then you start to be able to feel the effects of electromagnetic forces, which at present do not make their way into the core of the Earth, right? Because most of the electromagnetic forces, even the sun's electromagnetic forces, get stopped both in our Earth's magnetic field,
Right.
but then on top of that, just through the mantle's insulating powers. But if you were to basically compress the Earth's magnetic field and the sun's magnetic field and have galactic strands that were moving through so that we felt the effects of these huge magnetic fluxes, right? Like an electron density cloud almost. Then you have a periodicity where the already stored up imbalance from the core mantle boundary issues, right, that exist. It's like that comet hitting. It's like smacking things. I'll just let people
longer though. If it's a 3,000-year period between them, how long is the period of trauma?
That is a quick question to solve.
Yeah, I got you. And hey, it's okay to say we don't know that yet.
Yeah. My suspicion is that you have rapid change, and I think that change, just like we see in those 3,000 years cycles, and that they think it takes about 40 years for the climate to really change. I think that is probably our best indicator of when you have kind of the massive flux, that it's probably a 40 year period. So in my idea, like the main flip and switching in the geographic spin axis would probably happen over a 40-year period. So 40 years of 3,000 years, right? And then every one of them totally depends, because it's just like the Milankovitch cycles themselves, right? The combination of multiple cycles is going to affect whether you have a failed ice age, right? Or a failed interstitial, right? Because you have more than one cycle playing on things. And so as you have these imbalances, and the imbalances are happening like with a true periodicity, but what isn't, or sorry, the imbalances are uniformitarian. The imbalances are happening gradually, but it is the boundaries of the cycles that dictate whether the imbalances like trigger like that, or whether they're slow, whether they're reinforced, or whether they're canceled. And so this is all the stuff I'm working this out in my book, and I'm trying to create really good illustrations, because I know that this is kind of hard, and it's so much, it's a lot, like this is a fire hose. But if anybody listens to it and they're like, if they've already been working on these problems and they recognize, they're like, dude, okay, yeah, I see that. Once again, reach out to me, because I really want to publish on this soon.
You've taken it a long way, man, but you need the earth to cough up some other people that,
Yeah, I need some co-publishers.
Have some of the missing pages, but I mean, you got the book.
Yeah, because I think it's time. Like, honestly, we'll know whether this is legit or not, because I think we're like right on the cusp of one of these 3,000 year cycles. Because the increase, like the change in atmospheric gases as well as the change in the magnetic field, would be a product of us starting to enter the final wave front of one of these galactic filaments, right? And this would be a very subtle galactic filament, right? We're not in the central core where we can actually see them, how powerful they are. This is just one of these small 6th, 7th, 10th order fractal of what's going on in the galactic core, or closer to the center of the galaxy. All right. So that's basically it. I'm gonna end there. We'll see if we pique anyone's interest.
You are a very, very intelligent man, and a new friend of the Cosmic Summit and our following. We want to hear more from you, dude.
I appreciate it.
Huh. So how's the book coming along? Those are hard to write.
I mean, if you go to my Ice Ages article, I've got, what is it? So much stuff. And so most of my dumping ground I kind of put in here.
Yeah.
But I've probably got like 40 pages.
Okay.
And I probably need
somebody out there come forward. I mean, we're not a huge podcast by any means, but I do like the people. I know that a lot of the people watching are fellow travelers with you, and somebody might have some of the key pieces. So do not hesitate to contact Lance. How do you get in touch with you? Is it right there on your webpage? Is there contact me?
Yeah. If you just go to more and contact right here.
Okay.
On either one of my sites, I've got a contact.
And are most of the slides that you showed, like the cultural diffusion stuff, is that available at Utah Geology?
I've got some of it. Most of it. I've got quite a bit of stuff also on my Gathered in One site. Like, I've got some articles on, But yeah,
Well, I was kind of
that's
teeing up
another
and
book I'm
asked,
trying to
do
write.
you think we could take your PDF and link it in the description below?
Yeah, I can figure something out here.
Yeah. Yeah. At least take some key slides, that because you've got so much text in there,
Yeah.
people might want to click below and go take a better look at it.
Yeah. Most of that is basically like I'm just writing my book in those slides. And I'll be publishing that one before too long. I'm almost done with the
Have you
diffusionary
presented
stuff.
from a stage or any of this stuff yet?
I mean, I've done a good amount of stage presenting at work and such, but I've never been to anything like Galactic Summit where I'm with
Yeah.
people that I can be a little more free with. Like I say, my academic stuff, I'm usually kind of just sticking to the books. I don't try and go off into the fringe at all. But I like doing that stuff, I mean, that's where the fun
Man,
is.
that's what I mean. That's what we have. We have, if you will, I call them scientists and speculators, right? And the scientists are obviously the credentialed people with heretical understandings and data, and then the speculators are the ones who've taken their understandings and read their papers and said, "Hey, take a look at this. I think it fits here. I think it fits there." You're an interesting merge between the two, man. I mean, you're both a scientist and have taken it about as far as you can, but you're doing it all with data and also speculation that can't be ignored, things that just happen to fit, like the Kolbrin and just what your eyes tell you about the motifs from the ancient world. Well, man, um, you're on the list now, buddy. Like it or not, okay?
Yeah, we'll have to
Cosmic
do it.
Summit fellow traveler.
Maybe sometime you can come out here and do a tour too. I do tourist
Oh, I'd
design in the Grand
love.
Canyon. We can actually see this stuff like in the actual rock record.
Well, I have not been to the Grand Canyon, and thank you for the
Oh,
offer.
come
I
on
may
out,
take
man.
you
Come on
up
out.
on that, brother, because I don't
Seriously.
want to go there. I mean, I want to go there, but I think it'd make it so much better if I went with an old hand and a geologist and someone with an open mind. I think that'd be fascinating.
Yeah, you can
But I'd
fly
also
into
like to get you
Vegas. You
back
can fly
on
into
and
St. George.
talk about your uplifts and the rivers through them and all of that. I couldn't quite wrap my brain around it, but we'll have to have you back on the podcast. And thank you, Lance Weaver. Good to know you, man.
You too. You too.
Okay. Well, we'll have you
Thanks,
back
George.
soon. And everybody go check out Utah Geology. We have not seen the last of Lance Weaver. He may have figured it all out. Thank you, buddy.
Awesome. Thanks, George.